Hello again. Here we are making my focaccia bread recipe. We use it in way more than one application at the parlor. I think it is pretty much a perfect focaccia bread recipe, and it's dead easy. So here we go. So I have all-purpose flour. You can use bread flour if you like. All-purpose is what people have in their house, so we'll use all-purpose flour. I have dry active yeast and warm water. Warm water, just warm enough so you can feel it when you're running it in the tap. So I'm just gonna whisk or stir in the yeast. We don't really need to let it proof because it's gonna be sitting proofing with the dough for so long. It doesn't make a difference really. I also have kosher salt. So kosher salt I'm gonna add to the flour and mix it in a little bit. I'm gonna do that because if you put salt and yeast directly together, they don't really get along and the yeast doesn't do as good a job or it dies altogether. So then we mix them together. This is it. That's all that's in the dough. This recipe isn't so much about what goes in it, it's about how you're, well, the technique of how you're mixing it and how you're dealing with the dough as the day goes on. So start to finish, this dough takes about, I'd say 6 hours, but it's totally worth it. So all we're doing at this point, we're not kneading the dough. We don't need to knead it. We don't need to create any gluten really at this point. All we're doing is working out the lumps in the dough. That's all we're doing right now. The gluten will come as the day goes on and as the steps proceed. So as we approach the next step, I'll explain why and I'll show you how to create the gluten as we go. So right now you're just kind of squeezing it like this, just squeeze it together. It is very sticky, it's very wet, and that is good, that's what you want. Scrape down the sides, then I have olive oil. Put a little bit. It actually calls for a lot because you're gonna need a lot of it. So then just make sure there's some olive oil on the bottom and then work your way around the dough so the whole outside of the dough is covered with oil, and then use the dough to push some up the sides of the bowl. And that way when it rises up and it proofs, it won't stick anywhere in the bowl. Okay? Then we're going to cover it with plastic wrap. And then I'm going to set it on top of an oven that I have preheated to 200 degrees Fahrenheit. And that's just to help it proof. So you're not putting it in the oven, you're just letting it proof on top so there's a warm environment for it to do its thing. So I think this will take about 2 hours. I want it to be about doubled in size at least, and then we can go from there and I'll show you the next step on how to start creating the gluten. Alright, it's been about 2 hours for the bread dough. See how it's doubled in size? It's nice and proofed. Now we're gonna ruin it. So I need a little oil on my hands. So I just go around the outside and get some on my hands. That way the dough doesn't stick. So watch closely, okay? So you're gonna imagine this is like a hexagon. And for each corner of the hexagon, you're gonna pull up the corner of it and push it into the center. 3, 4, 5, 6. So that's all the way around. Now you're gonna do it again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So you did it twice, completely all the way around in a circle. Then take the whole thing and flip it over. And that's it. You're gonna do that 3 more times. And in between each time, you're gonna let it double in size. It seems a little bit over the top in terms of how much work you have to do. But really, that took me, what, 30 seconds? And the first part of it took me about a minute and a half, 2 minutes. So it's really not that much work in terms of how much time it's gonna take out of your day. It's just important because you wanna create the gluten, but you wanna relax the gluten in between each step. so that's why we're doing it like this. It helps make it really, really fluffy on the inside and not so tough or chewy, which is what we're going for. So we're gonna come back to this after it doubles in size again, but because you created some gluten, instead of it taking 2 hours, it's gonna take about an hour and maybe 15 minutes this time. So each time you do it, it takes less amount of time for it to double in size. So we're gonna put it back on the stove here and let it proof once again, and I'll see you in about 1:15. Okay, it's been another hour, so we're gonna do exactly the same thing we did the first time. 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Give it a real good push. Each time you do it, you'll notice it's getting stronger and more kind of fluffy, kind of pillowy. Flip it over again. Let it go for another hour or 45 minutes or so. And we'll do the exact same thing again. And we'll do that 2 more times before we push it out onto the tray. Okay, it's risen for a 3rd time, so we're gonna knock it down a 3rd time. A little more olive oil if you need it. I put it on my hand. You see how it's it's becoming more jiggly and it's like relaxed, but it's creating some gluten. You can pull it like this and it will stretch on you. That's a great thing. So do the exact same thing we did the first 2 times. 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then flip it over yet again. There's a hole there, but that's okay. Let it do that 1 more time, and then we do that process 1 more time. Let it rise, and then we can push it out on the tray. Okay, we're at the final stage of our flipping of the dough. So let's do it 1 more time. 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4. See how it's so glutinous here? 5, 6. That's almost hard to do it at this point. We're gonna let this double in size, like really make sure it's doubled in size before we move on. But the next stage is to push it out on the tray and let it rise on the tray, and then we can bake it. So we'll see you in about, I'd say 45 minutes it'll be ready. Hey, so we are done with the folding of the dough in from the corners part of the recipe. Now it's time to dump it onto the tray. Watch how pillowy this looks. Oh, look at that. Nice and pillowy and soft. Now we're just gonna, and you don't be afraid to be a little rough with it, because we're just gonna let it rise again. So we're 1 more time. So you're just gonna stick your fingers in it like this to make dimples. Push it right to the edges and the corners, and try to be as even as you can with it. If you have to like kind of push it out like this to make that happen, or like this, then go for it, because it won't matter at this point. Then you want to push it in with your fingers to make the dimples, to make it look like the traditional focaccia bread shape. Get it even. Because we let the dough relax in between each step, this should be pretty easy to push out because it's pretty relaxed gluten, right? So if you just kneaded out the dough and it's really, really tough and you tried to push it out, you probably have a really hard time. But because we did it the way we did it, it's really easy to do at this stage. Now you can top it with anything you want, really. You can do, I'm gonna do rosemary and Kalamata black olives. I'm just gonna put a little oil on the rosemary, and that just helps insulate it from the heat so it doesn't burn. It might get crispy and awesome, but it won't burn on you if you did that. Okay. You could do sun-dried tomatoes, you could do red onions, you could do anything you want, really. A traditional thing to do is rosemary and red onions. I prefer to do rosemary myself. I don't, you know, red onions are an okay idea, but it's really tough to get the red onions to keep from burning, so I don't bother with the red onions. And then just push them in. Push the rosemary into the dough. That way it becomes kind of part of the bread. And then the same thing with these black olives. So I just took them, they were pit in, and I just took them, and with the pit in, you just kind of crush them with your finger like that, and remove the stone, and then rip them in half. So that's all I've done with these. And the same thing, you're gonna do the same thing with these as you did with the rosemary, and just push them into the dough like that. This part's like not super time consuming, but it can seem tedious, but it will be worth your time. Push it in. And the amount you put on top is completely up to you. So I don't know if I'll have a measurement to put in the recipe, but if you like a little bit, then put a little bit. If you like a lot, then put a lot. It's up to you. Okay, and just try to keep it even, just so every bite kind of gets a piece of it, right? Push them in. And then I got olive oil here. Traditionally you do olive oil, and you can be a little generous with it. Try to be even with it as well. And if you get, if it kind of pools on you, just move it around. At the parlor we make loaves like this, but they're 4 times as big. So they're this way and this way. They're 4 times as big as this one, and we'll do 3 or 4 at a time sometimes because we're busy. Hopefully we'll get back to that point soon. And then I like to top it with, this is just flaky sea salt. Now there's salt in the dough, and there's a little salt in the, actually a lot of salt I should say, in the Kalamata olives if you're doing olives, so just be careful with it, but it does add a nice extra boost of salt for something like bread that usually needs the extra salt for it to taste good. Now you're gonna let it sit back on the stove top for another 45 minutes or so, maybe half an hour, until it's really poofy. It's gonna poof up to about this, and then we're gonna bake it in a 425 degree Fahrenheit oven for about 20-25 minutes, and then it'll be ready to go. So stay tuned for that. Hey folks, so you take a look at this, look at how it's risen up above the edge of the pan. That's exactly what you want. Don't let it rise to the point where it goes over the edge of the pan, but once you put it in the oven, it won't do that. It will rise straight up, and that's what we want to do. So I have my oven preheated at 425, and we're gonna bake this for 20 minutes in the center rack, and we'll check on it in 20 minutes, see how it's looking. Hey, so our focaccia is ready. Take a look at that. Nice and golden brown on the top. You tell when it's done when it's golden brown, and it sounds hollow when you flick it, or you touch it like that. Now let's check the bottom, because you want to just make sure the bottom is brown. It doesn't have to be as brown as the top, but you just want to, yep, little brown, excellent. So we're just gonna transfer this to a cooling rack, and we'll let it cool 100% before we cut it. And that's very key to make sure it's not doughy in the middle, is to let it cool. So I know it's hard to wait, but you gotta do it. Okay, so we'll see you then. All right, it's all cooled off, so let's carve into this thing and take a look. I'm gonna cut it right in half. And look at how fluffy and soft that is. That's because of all the extra work we did with those steps, folding in the dough, creating the gluten and letting it relax. So I think it's definitely paid off. Now we can cut it this way and serve it with some pasta, make garlic bread or something with it, which is what we're gonna be doing with this at the parlor. My daughter's home. Or you could also cut it like this and make it into a sandwich, which is something we're doing for our chicken and brie sandwich. And that's it. You can do almost anything with this. You can make croutons with it too if it's a day old, or if it's getting too hard or stale. It freezes really, really well too. So you can do any toppings. You can leave it plain if you want as well. And yeah, hope you try it at home and let me know how it turns out. Thanks.